Um, Going back to the idea of hell, or the doctrine of hell, rather.
Yeah.
So, is it true that, on the one hand, we can affirm hell in the sense that that's what we experience when we reject God,
Yeah.
but at the same time, God would not allow for anything that we would define as eternal hell? Is that?
Well, I mean, I have my arguments for the latter. The former, I think, is the only definition of hell that a Christian can accept.
Okay.
And this is, in fact, the Eastern Christian sort of standard view, which that the language of divine wrath and so on is a very handy kind of pictorial shorthand. But the truth of the matter is that what hell is a condition of the soul that has closed itself off from divine love and from love of the neighbor, in which case the glory of God that should enter into us and transfigure us is experienced as a kind of chastisement of conscience and of the self, as a sort of fire. That's just sort of standard. I mean, the Eastern tradition has and maybe this in part has to do with the centrality of the contemplative tradition in the East. That's the definition of hell that you'll hear from a pulpit on a Sunday morning, usually. On the other hand, I agree with Gregory of Nyssa, for instance, the great 4th century church father, as well as Isaac the Syrian, and perhaps secretly Maximus the Confessor, and a number of other figures, as well as more recent figures like George MacDonald. That there are very profound arguments why no, that could not be a successive, eternal self-determination. No, but that it could not be a condition of eternal loss, even allowing the will to pursue its perversity to the end. There's just not an infinite capacity for rejection of the good in the way that there's an infinite capacity for the good to reach us.
So how do we understand the demonic and Satan then? Because I know in The Doors of the Sea you write about our present state being captive to demonic powers, but at the same time they have no ontological status of their own.
No, it's not. I don't think. I'm all for belief in fallen spirits. I just don't see them as fallen forever either. I'm a bit of an Origenist there. In The Doors of the Sea, it's been a while since I read that book. I hear it's good.
It's very good.
Oh, good. Well, I'll have another look at it. But you have to understand, it's been a while since I wrote it. That the point I was trying to make is that the various ways in which Christians try to reconcile the reality of evil to their faith in God ultimately tends to implicate God in evil to the point of evil being an aspect of God. It is kind of meaningless, even in a providential sense, to suggest that God could possess a nature absolutely distinct from his acts. Well, that means nothing. One's nature is, what one does is what one is, and one's acts are possibilities only because they're resident in the nature one possesses, and that's true of God as well. If God could directly will evil, then God would be in some sense evil. The point I was trying to make in that book is that the actual story that the New Testament tells and that the early church was insistent upon is that the one will of God towards the union of all things with him allows for, I don't want to get too technical here, but what Maximus the Confessor would call gnomic misuse of the will, which leads to all sorts of catastrophic realities, but that trying to look at the evil in history and explain it away is all part of God's good plan, and that all of it will add up to a calculus in which everything makes sense, is not a belief in providence in the proper sense, but is a confusion between God and the evil that we do. But that's a different set of issues. We live in a fallen world. That's one of the claims that Christianity makes. We live in a fallen world. It's not just the case that human beings have been estranged from God. It's that all of creation has been estranged from God because spiritual life, human, angelic, what have you, is, in this rather ancient view of things, a mediation between creation and God. It exists within a sort of economy of stewardship, and in losing our intimacy, our union, our proper relation to God, we subjected all of creation to death. How this happened, what exactly the story is, isn't important, but that essential affirmation is at the basis of all Christian belief.
So that makes me wonder, what are your thoughts about N.T. Wright's kind of reinterpretation of what Christians mean by heaven as God recreating this earth?
Well, to be honest, that is more or less how the New Testament writers understood it. The kingdom of God isn't elsewhere. It is this creation restored into what it should have been from the beginning. And again, of course, that. Yeah. Is
there value though in the kind of the old language of the soul and going to heaven?
Certainly there's value in the language of the soul. No, to be honest, no. I think eschatologically, this is an issue that comes up occasionally with my Thomist friends. As you know, most medieval theology had kind of lost any sense of the cosmic dimensions of salvation as it's depicted in the New Testament. Mm-hmm. It's clear in Romans 8, for instance, that Paul is talking about a glorification of all creation.
Yeah.
And all the language, even, when you get to the book of Revelation, and people should be very careful in how they interpret, how they read the book of Revelation. But even there, the imagery of the New Jerusalem really means what it says, that in some sense, just like Jeremiah or Micah or Isaiah, the author of Revelation, John the Divine, is looking forward to a restored cosmos, not to an escape from the world into some other realm. But a restoration of all things, which in Acts is called just that, apokatastasis ton panton, the restoration of all things. And in Eastern Christian tradition, this sense probably was the sense of the last things was probably preserved somewhat better than in the West, though I can point to medieval Orthodox texts that would probably be just as worldless in their view of the last things as Western texts. But again, if you're Orthodox, this language of cosmic glorification of humankind as a cosmic mediator, Christ as the mediator who restores the priestly role of humanity in creation so that all of creation can be restored, is just a commonplace. One of the loveliest images of the kingdom of God, and one that's very popular in the East, is that think of the entirety of creation as becoming like the burning bush, utterly pervaded by the divine glory, transfigured and yet not consumed. So certainly the authors of the New Testament look towards a world of bodies, not flesh and blood, I mean, you have to understand, Paul is still he's, for instance, using the language of the first century. He says flesh and blood cannot inherit the kingdom of God. And he means what he says. But that's not. But one mustn't confuse that with the concept of body. For him, flesh and blood is a certain state of fallenness itself, in which the body is animated by psyche, which we tend to translate as soul, but could translate just as life principle, if you want, as opposed to the spiritual body, in which it's a state of existence of embodiedness that is not subject to death or decay or the division of soul and flesh. So I mean, it's not simply a resuscitation of this world as it currently exists. It is a complete transfiguration and transformation. Nonetheless, it is this creation that is to be saved, not just human personalities.